On New Year's Eve, my own sister threw a glass of wine in my face and demanded $150,000 for plastic surgery, and when I refused, she kicked me out into the freezing night. How did it come to this? And why was I the one paying for everything in the first place? My name is Reagan. I'm 26 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've been living a life that looked comfortable from the outside, but felt like a slow, silent collapse from within. By day, I worked as a property manager, juggling tenants, maintenance requests, and endless paperwork. By night, I took on freelance bookkeeping clients, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned and my head throbbed. I didn't do it because I loved the grind. I did it because I had no choice. And tonight, everything finally broke. The sound of shattering glass cut through the warm air of the living room, sharp and violent, drowning out the distant fireworks exploding over Lake Tahoe. For a moment, it felt like time itself had split open. 1 second, I was standing there trying to reason with my family. The next, I was standing in silence, my heart pounding as red wine dripped slowly from my hair down to the floor. Elysia, my half-sister, stood in front of me, her chest rising and falling with anger, her perfectly styled hair and flawless makeup untouched by the chaos she had just created. Her eyes were filled with something I had seen too many times before. Not just anger, not even frustration. Entitlement. "I told you already," she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. "I need that money. My surgery is next week. Do you want me to look like this forever?" I blinked, trying to process her words, even though I had heard them at least 5 times already that night. $150,000. That was what she wanted, not asked for, not hoped for, demanded. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm, even as my skin stung from the wine, soaking into my clothes. "Elysia, I told you, I can't," I said quietly. "That money isn't extra. It's all I have saved. It's for Dad's treatment, his medication, his therapy. If something happens—" "Oh, here we go again," she interrupted, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Everything is always about him with you. It's exhausting." Her words hit harder than the wine. Before I could respond, Pamela, my stepmother, stepped forward like she had been waiting for her moment. "Don't you dare try to guilt us," she said coldly, pointing a finger straight at me. "That money doesn't belong to you. It belongs to this family. And you've been hoarding it like some selfish little thief." I stared at her, stunned. For a split second, I wondered if I had misheard her. If maybe the stress, the exhaustion, the sleepless nights had finally started to distort reality. But no, her expression was steady, certain, cruel. "I'm not hoarding anything," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay composed. "I've been paying for everything. The house, the bills, the food, Dad's care, everything. That savings account is the only emergency fund we have left." "Excuses," Pamela snapped. "You just don't want to help your sister. You'd rather see her future ruined than give up a little money." A little money. The number echoed in my head like a cruel joke. 10,000,000. I felt something tighten in my chest, a familiar pressure that had been building for years now. But I pushed it down, just like I always did. "I'm not saying no because I don't care," I said, softer this time. "I'm saying no because I'm trying to keep this family afloat." For a moment, there was silence. Then Elysia laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was sharp, bitter, almost mocking. "You're unbelievable," she said. "You act like you're some kind of hero, like we should be grateful to you." Before I could react, she grabbed the crystal goblet from the table beside her and, without hesitation, flung its contents straight at my face. The cold liquid hit me instantly, soaking into my hair, my clothes, my skin. The smell of expensive red wine filled the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I just stood there, blinking slowly as the last drop slid down my cheek. "If you won't pay," she said, her voice low and venomous, "then don't even think about staying here." Pamela didn't hesitate to back her up. "Get out," she said, her tone flat and final. "If you can't contribute, then you have no right to live under this roof." Something inside me went very, very quiet. No anger, no panic, no tears. Just silence. I looked at them, really looked at them for the first time in a long time. At the woman who had spent years manipulating every situation to her advantage. At the sister who saw me, not as family, but as a resource. And suddenly, something clicked. They weren't asking. They weren't negotiating. They were replacing me. I reached up slowly and wiped the wine from my face with the back of my hand. My fingers trembled slightly, but my voice didn't when I spoke. "Okay," I said. That was it. No argument, no pleading, no explanation. Just one word. For a brief second, I saw confusion flicker across Alicia's face, like she had expected more resistance, more drama, more submission. But I gave her nothing. I turned, walked past them, and headed toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear Pamela muttering something under her breath, and Alicia scoffing as if she had just won some kind of victory. Maybe she thought she had. The heavy oak door swung open, and the freezing air rushed in like a shock to my system. It stole the warmth from my skin instantly, biting through the thin fabric of my clothes. I stepped outside without looking back. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in the night. Just like that, I was alone. The contrast was almost surreal. Inside the house, there had been warmth, light, and the distant glow of celebration. Outside, there was nothing but darkness, snow, and the sharp sting of winter cutting through every layer I had. Fireworks continued to explode in the distance, painting the sky with flashes of color that felt completely disconnected from my reality. I stood there for a moment, my breath visible in the air, my body slowly beginning to shiver. Then I started walking. My car was parked at the edge of the driveway, half buried under fresh snow. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just from the cold, but from the weight of everything that had just happened. 2 years. 2 years of working myself to exhaustion. 2 years of sacrificing everything. And this was how it ended? I reached the car and fumbled with my keys, my fingers stiff and numb as I struggled to unlock the door. When I finally managed to get inside, the cold didn't disappear. It followed me in, settling into the worn seats and the stale air like an unwelcome guest. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The silence was overwhelming, too quiet, too empty. And then, without warning, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound jolted me back to reality. I pulled it out with shaking hands, the bright screen illuminating the darkness inside the car. A notification from my bank. At that moment, I didn't know it yet, but that single message was about to change everything. The glow of my phone screen cut through the darkness of the car, harsh and unforgiving. My fingers were still trembling from the cold as I tapped the notification open, not expecting anything more than another routine expense alert. But it wasn't routine. It was a charge. $500? At a premium liquor store just a few miles from the house I had just been thrown out of. For a second, I just stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The numbers didn't make sense, not because of the amount, but because of what it meant. That card, the one tied to that account, I had given it to Alicia for one reason only: groceries, nutritional supplements, anything related to my father's care. Not champagne, not luxury alcohol, not celebration. My grip tightened around the phone as something cold and sharp began to spread through my chest, replacing the numb ache that had been sitting there all night. They weren't just ignoring what had happened. They were celebrating it. While I was sitting in a freezing car, soaked in wine and shaking from the cold, they were opening bottles, laughing, toasting to the new year, using money I had earned by working myself into exhaustion. A slow breath left my lips, visible in the icy air inside the car. For the first time that night, I didn't feel hurt. I felt clear. I unlocked my banking app with steady fingers, navigating through the familiar interface without hesitation. Every account, every card, every line of credit I had extended to them over the years was laid out in front of me like a map of my own exploitation. I paused for just a second. Not because I was unsure, but because I realized what this moment meant. For 2 years, I had lived under the illusion that I was holding my family together, that if I just worked harder, gave more, endured a little longer, things would stabilize, that somehow my sacrifices would eventually matter. But staring at that $500 charge, I finally understood the truth. To them, I wasn't family. I was a resource. And resources don't get appreciated, they get used. My thumb hovered over the card management section. Then I pressed the button. Freeze card. The confirmation prompt appeared, almost politely asking if I was sure. I didn't hesitate. Confirm. A small message popped up on the screen, informing me that the card had been successfully frozen. Just like that, their access to my money was gone. But I didn't stop there. One by one, I went through every linked account, every supplementary card, every financial connection that tied me to them. Each time, the same process. Open, select, freeze. It was quiet, methodical, almost surgical, and with each action, something inside me shifted, not violently, not dramatically, but steadily, like a door that had been stuck for years, finally creaking open. When I finished, I lowered the phone slowly, my reflection faintly visible on the dark screen. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped. I leaned back against the seat, pulling the old blanket from the back and wrapping it tightly around my shoulders. It scratched against my skin, rough and worn, but it was better than nothing. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing everything in a silent, indifferent white. Inside the car, the cold seeped in from every direction. The heater barely worked, pushing out weak bursts of lukewarm air that disappeared almost as quickly as they came. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, my mind drifted backward. 2 years. It had been 2 years since the accident. I could still remember the phone call, the way my heart dropped before I even picked up, like some part of me already knew. The hospital lights, the sterile smell, the sight of my father sitting in a wheelchair, his body still, his eyes filled with confusion and pain. He had survived, but the man who walked into that accident never fully came back. His speech became slurred, his movements limited, his independence gone, and somewhere in the chaos that followed, I made a decision. I would take care of him, no matter what it cost. At the time, I thought that meant long hours, financial strain, maybe putting my own life on hold for a while. I didn't realize it would mean giving up everything. My routine became relentless. 16-hour days, managing properties, handling tenants, solving problems that never seemed to end. Then switching to bookkeeping at night, chasing deadlines, double-checking numbers while fighting to keep my eyes open. Every dollar I earned had a purpose. Mortgage payments, medical bills, therapy sessions, groceries, utilities, and beyond that, their lifestyle. Designer clothes, luxury dinners, endless small expenses that somehow added up to thousands every month. I told myself it was temporary, that once my father got better, things would change. But they never did. If anything, it got worse, because they learned. They learned exactly how far they could push me. They learned that I wouldn't say no, not when my father's well-being was on the line. And they used that. If a transfer was late, his medication would be forgotten. If I questioned an expense, he would be left unattended for hours. If I tried to set boundaries, they reminded me subtly, casually, that I wasn't the one in control. It wasn't just manipulation. It was leverage, and I had been negotiating my own life like a hostage for 2 years. A sharp exhale left my lips as I opened my eyes again, staring blankly at the windshield, now covered in a thin layer of frost from the inside. How had I not seen it sooner? Or maybe I had. Maybe I just didn't want to accept it. The car creaked softly as the temperature dropped further, the metal contracting in the cold. My stomach twisted, a dull ache reminding me that I hadn't eaten since early that afternoon. I had been too busy, too distracted, too used to putting myself last. I shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around me, trying to ignore the discomfort, but there was something else I couldn't ignore. A thought that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind, now pushing its way forward. If I really stopped supporting them, what would happen to my father? The question settled heavily in my chest. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had I just made things worse? Had I acted too quickly? My fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket as I stared into the darkness. Then another image surfaced. Alicia's face. The way she looked at me as she threw that wine. Not desperate. Not struggling. Not even frustrated. Just entitled. And then the charge. $500. Champagne. Not medicine. Not care. Not even necessity. Celebration. Something inside me hardened. No. This wasn't on me. It never had been. I reached for my phone again. Not to reverse anything, but to scroll through the accounts one more time, confirming what I had already done. Everything was cut off. Clean. Final. For the first time, the responsibility that had been crushing me for years didn't feel like mine alone. I couldn't fix everything, but I could stop being the one enabling it. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes once more, letting the silence settle around me. The cold was still there, the uncertainty, the fear, but beneath all of that, there was something new, something steady, resolve. By the time the first faint hint of dawn began to creep into the sky, I already knew what I had to do next. I wasn't going back. Not to beg, not to explain, not to fix what they had broken. If I was going to protect my father, I needed to stop thinking like someone trapped inside their system and start thinking like someone who was ready to break it. By the time the sky began to lighten with the pale gray of early morning, I was still sitting in the driver's seat, wrapped in that thin, scratchy blanket, staring out at a world that looked completely unchanged, even though mine had just been torn apart. The cold had settled deep into my bones. My fingers were stiff, my lips dry, my entire body aching from a night without sleep. But strangely, my mind felt sharper than it had in years. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to fix things. I was thinking about how to end them. Not violently, not recklessly, but completely. I started the engine, the car groaning in protest, before finally coming to life. The weak heater coughed out lukewarm air as I pulled out of the empty parking lot and drove slowly toward the only place I knew would be open this early on New Year's morning. A small coffee shop on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a quiet place with dim lighting and worn wooden tables, but right now, it felt like the safest place in the world. And more importantly, it was where Sarah was waiting. Sarah had been my best friend since college. She was one of the very few people who knew the truth about my situation, the long hours, the financial pressure, the silent control my stepmother had over my life. She had tried, more than once, to convince me to step away. I never listened. Until now, when I walked inside, the warmth hit me instantly, wrapping around me like something I had almost forgotten how to feel. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled off my coat, the faint smell of dried wine still clinging to the fabric. Sarah was already seated in the corner, a cup of coffee in front of her, her expression shifting the moment she saw me. She stood up immediately. "Oh my God. Reagan," she whispered, her eyes scanning my face, my clothes, the exhaustion I knew I couldn't hide. I tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "I've had a long night," I said softly. That was all it took. We sat down, and for the next several minutes, I told her everything. The demand, the argument, the wine, the door slamming behind me, and then the charge. I watched her expression change as I spoke, shock turning into anger, anger settling into something darker and more focused. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then she reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her grip firm and steady. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "You did nothing wrong." I let out a shaky breath, looking down at our hands. "It doesn't feel that way," I admitted. "I keep thinking about my dad. What if they take it out on him? What if cutting them off just makes things worse?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "They already made it worse," she said. "You just finally stopped pretending they weren't." Her words hit me harder than anything else that night, because deep down, I knew she was right. "They've been controlling you for years," she continued, "using your father as leverage, draining everything from you, and the moment you set one boundary, they throw you out into the cold. That's not family, Reagan. That's abuse. Abuse. I had never used that word before. Not out loud, not even in my own thoughts. But hearing it now, something inside me shifted. Like a truth I had been avoiding was finally forced into the light. I don't even know where to start, I said quietly. Everything is tied to them. The house, the bills, the accounts. I've built my entire life around keeping them stable. Then stop keeping them stable, Sarah said simply. Start protecting yourself and your dad the right way. I looked up at her, confused. What does that even mean? It means you stop handling this emotionally, she replied, and start handling it legally. The word hung in the air between us. Legally. It felt heavy, serious, final. I don't have time for lawsuits or long processes, I said. My dad needs help now. I'm not talking about dragging this out, Sarah said. I'm talking about using the system that already exists to protect him. And you. She paused for a moment, studying my face carefully before adding, What about your grandmother's lawyer, the one who handled her estate? Mr. Henderson. I hadn't thought about him in years. After my grandmother passed away, he had handled all the legal matters quietly, professionally, without much involvement from me beyond signing a few documents. At the time, I had been too overwhelmed with my father's condition to pay attention to anything else. I don't even know if he'd see me, I said. Sarah gave me a look. Reagan, she said gently, you're the only one who hasn't realized how much power you might actually have. I frowned slightly, her words not fully making sense yet, but something about them stuck. An hour later, I was standing in front of a brick office building that looked almost untouched by time. The sign outside was simple, understated. Henderson and Associates. My heart beat a little faster as I pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. The receptionist greeted me politely, and within minutes, I was being led down a quiet hallway toward a familiar office. When the door opened, Mr. Henderson looked up from behind his desk. He hadn't changed much, still in his 60s, still composed, still carrying that quiet authority that made you feel like nothing escaped his attention. Miss Reagan, he said, standing up with a slight nod, I wasn't expecting to see you today. I'm sorry for coming without an appointment, I said quickly, but I really need your help. He studied me for a moment, his sharp eyes taking in the details I hadn't even thought to hide the exhaustion, the tension, the faint stain of wine on my sleeve. Then he gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit, he said calmly. Start from the beginning. So I did. Once again, I told the story, but this time, it felt different, less like a confession, more like a statement. When I finished, Mr. Henderson didn't react immediately. He simply leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together, as he processed everything I had said. Then, without a word, he reached into a drawer beside him and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. He placed it on the desk between us with a quiet, deliberate motion. On the front, written in neat, careful handwriting, were 2 words, Project Freedom. My breath caught slightly as I looked at it. What is this? I asked. Mr. Henderson met my gaze, his expression unreadable. This, he said slowly, is something your grandmother prepared many years ago, in case a situation like this ever arose. A strange chill ran down my spine. He opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents, contracts, legal agreements, property records. 10 years ago, he continued, your father was in a very difficult financial position. Significant debts, risk of losing everything. I frowned, confusion mixing with unease. I didn't know that, I said. You weren't meant to, he replied. Your grandmother stepped in. She paid off his debts and, in return, legally transferred ownership of the lakefront property into her name to protect it. My heart skipped. What does that mean? He turned one of the documents toward me, tapping a specific section. It means, he said, his voice steady, that the house you've been paying for, the one your stepmother believes she controls, was never hers to begin with. The room felt suddenly smaller, quieter. He was allowed to live there under a life estate, Mr. Henderson continued, but the property itself remained under your grandmother's ownership. I swallowed hard. And after she passed away, his gaze didn't waver. It was transferred to you. The words hit me like a physical force. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All those years, all that money, all that control they held over me, it had all been built on a lie. They kicked me out, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Of my own house. Mr. Henderson gave a small, solemn nod. Yes, he said, they did. Silence filled the room. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was electric. Because for the first time in years, the balance of power had shifted, and I was no longer the one standing on the outside. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to their chaos. I was building something far more dangerous. Control. I sat across from Mr. Henderson as the weight of everything he had just revealed settled into my chest. My house, my responsibility, my power. It felt unreal, like I had been living someone else's life this entire time and had only just stepped back into my own. They don't know, do they? I asked quietly. He shook his head once. No. And from what you've told me, they've been operating under a very convenient assumption. I almost let out a bitter laugh. Convenient. That was one way to describe it. They think it's theirs, I said. They've always acted like it is. And that belief, he replied calmly, is exactly why we need to proceed carefully. We don't act emotionally. We act correctly. Correctly. The word grounded me, because for so long, everything I had done had been driven by emotion, fear, guilt, obligation, and where had that gotten me? Sleeping in a freezing car on New Year's Eve? I straightened slightly in my seat. Tell me what I need to do. Mr. Henderson didn't rush. He opened the folder again, flipping through several documents before laying out a few key pages in front of me. First, he said, we secure your legal position. You are the rightful owner of that property. That gives you authority but also responsibility. My fingers brushed lightly against the paper, the inked words suddenly feeling heavier than anything I had signed before. Second, he continued, we address your father's situation. Based on your account, there is a serious concern regarding neglect. We don't accuse, we document, we observe, and when necessary, we involve the appropriate authorities. A quiet tension settled in my chest. I don't want to hurt him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. If things escalate, they already have, he interrupted gently. What you're doing now isn't escalation, it's intervention. I held his gaze, searching for doubt. I didn't find any. Third, he said, sliding another document toward me, we begin separating your financial obligations from theirs. You are under no legal requirement to fund their lifestyle. That part, I had already started. And yet hearing it said so clearly made something inside me loosen. I wasn't abandoning them. I was reclaiming myself. What about the utilities? I asked. Everything is under my name. Mr. Henderson leaned back slightly. You have the right to manage services associated with your property. If you choose to modify or suspend non-essential services, that is within your legal discretion. However, given your father's condition, we must ensure that proper medical attention is not compromised. I nodded slowly, understanding the balance he was laying out. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about exposure. About forcing the truth into the open where it couldn't be ignored. I picked up the pen he had placed in front of me, the metal cool against my fingers. For a brief second, I hesitated, not out of fear, but because I knew this was the moment everything shifted. Once I signed, there was no going back to who I had been. The girl who endured, the girl who explained, the girl who paid. I signed my name. The ink dried quickly, final and undeniable. When I stood up to leave the office, I felt different, not lighter, stronger, like something inside me had been sharpened. Outside, the morning had fully arrived, pale sunlight reflecting off the snow-covered streets. The world looked peaceful, but I knew better. Because somewhere across town, in that house, they still thought they had won. 2 days later, Alicia was still living in that illusion. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could picture it perfectly the way she moved through the world, as if everything existed for her benefit, as if consequences were something that only happened to other people. That morning, she drove the luxury sedan I had been making monthly payments on, gliding through the busy streets of the financial district, like she owned every inch of it. She was dressed to impress, designer outfit, perfect makeup. That limited edition handbag I had bought her for her birthday back when I still believed gifts could earn affection. She parked right in front of an exclusive exotic car dealership, ignoring the clearly marked restrictions, and stepped out with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Inside, the showroom gleamed under bright lights, rows of polished cars, reflecting wealth and status. That was the world she believed she belonged to. She walked past Ferraris and Lamborghinis without a second glance, heading straight for the front desk where a receptionist sat quietly working. "I'm here to see the manager," Alicia said, not even bothering to hide her impatience. The receptionist looked up politely. "Of course, ma'am. If you could just wait a moment." "I don't wait," Alicia snapped, slamming her hand lightly against the marble counter. "Tell him a VIP client is here." The shift in tone drew attention. A few employees glanced over. The atmosphere changed subtly, but noticeably. Moments later, the branch director approached. He was composed, professional, his expression neutral but observant. Alicia's demeanor changed instantly. Her posture softened, her voice sweetened, her entire presence shifting into something rehearsed and calculated. She smiled, introduced herself, and then began to speak fast, confident, almost rehearsed about how she was the perfect face for his brand, how she would soon undergo a full transformation, how she could attract wealthy clients and elevate his business. She talked about the $150,000 surgery as if it had already been paid for, as if it was inevitable, as if reality would simply align with her expectations. The director listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, until finally he raised his hand. "That's enough," he said calmly. The room fell quiet. "I'm sorry," he continued, his tone polite but firm, "but we don't hire based on appearance alone. We require experience, professionalism, and respect for others. Based on what I've observed, you don't meet those requirements." The words landed cleanly. No anger, no insult, just truth. For a moment, Alicia didn't react. Then her expression cracked, not dramatically, just enough. A flicker of disbelief, of humiliation, of something she wasn't used to feeling. She turned sharply, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she stormed out without another word. But rejection didn't humble her. It only redirected her. She needed to regain control, to prove, if only to herself, that nothing had changed. So she drove to one of the most expensive French restaurants in the city. A place she had been to many times before. A place where she had never once paid. She ordered extravagantly. Champagne. Lobster, the best of everything. She sat by the window, sipping slowly, convincing herself that she was still untouchable, that I was still beneath her, that the world still worked the way she believed it did. When the bill arrived, she didn't even look at it. She placed the card on the tray with casual confidence and waited. A few minutes later, the waiter returned. His expression had changed. "Miss," he said quietly, "I'm sorry, but your card was declined." Alicia blinked. "What?" "We tried multiple times," he continued. "Do you have another method of payment?" A faint laugh escaped her lips. "That's impossible. Try again." He did. Same result. The second card. Declined. The third. Declined. This time, there was no laughter, only silence. Around her, people began to notice. Whispers. Glances. The shift was immediate. From admiration to curiosity. From curiosity to judgment. The manager approached. His tone was polite, but firm. "If the bill is not settled, we will have to take further action." And just like that, the illusion shattered. Alicia sat there, frozen, the reality closing in around her. For the first time in her life, she had nowhere to run, and no one left to pay for her mistakes. Back in my car, parked quietly across town, my phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another piece of the system collapsing exactly as it should. I looked at the screen, my expression calm, because this time, I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. And this was only the beginning. By the fourth night, the temperature had dropped so low that even the air itself felt sharp, like it could cut through skin if you stayed outside too long. The entire lakefront area had gone quiet, buried under a heavy, suffocating cold that seemed to press down on everything. And inside that house, the warmth they had taken for granted was gone. I didn't have to be there to know what it felt like. I had lived in that house long enough to understand how quickly the heat disappeared once the system stopped running. The stone walls that once held warmth now leaked it into the freezing night. The polished marble floors, once a symbol of luxury, would have turned into sheets of ice beneath bare feet. Everything that made that house comfortable depended on me. And now, for the first time, they were experiencing what life felt like without my constant support. Pamela and Alicia were huddled together in the living room, wrapped in layers of expensive coats and blankets that suddenly felt useless against the cold creeping in from every corner. The decorative electric fireplace, something Alicia used to brag about to her friends, sat dark and lifeless, nothing more than a hollow piece of glass. But even then, even as the temperature dropped and the silence grew heavier, they didn't think about what they had done. They thought about how I had wronged them. "I don't understand how she dares to do this." Alicia's voice trembled, her teeth chattering as she clutched her coat tighter. "Does she think she can just cut us off like this?" Pamela didn't answer right away. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, her phone gripped tightly in her hand. "She's trying to scare us," she finally said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "She'll come back. She always does." But I didn't. Instead, I sat on the edge of a bed in a modest motel room across town, my phone resting in my hands as I stared at the screen. Dozens of missed calls. Voicemail after voicemail. At first, I didn't listen. I couldn't. Not yet. Because I knew what I would hear. Anger, blame, demands. But eventually, my finger hovered over one of the recordings, and I pressed play. Pamela's voice filled the small room instantly. Sharp, furious, panicked. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. "Turn the power back on right now. Your father is sick. He has a fever. Do you want to kill him? If anything happens to him, it's on you." The message ended abruptly. Silence followed. My chest tightened as her words echoed in my mind. "Your father is sick." For a moment, everything inside me twisted. Instinct took over the part of me that had spent 2 years running back, fixing everything, making sure he was safe no matter what it cost me. I could picture him, lying in that room, alone, cold. The thought hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I stood up abruptly, pacing the small room, my hands shaking as guilt and fear surged through me all at once. What if I had gone too far? What if this wasn't just about them anymore? What if he was the one paying the price? I stopped in front of the window, staring out at the dark street, my breath fogging the glass. For a second, I almost grabbed my keys, almost drove back, almost gave in. But then another thought cut through the panic. If I went back now, nothing would change. They would apologize, maybe, or maybe they wouldn't. But either way, I would end up in the same position, paying, enduring, hoping. And my father? He would still be trapped with them, still dependent on people who saw his care as a burden, still at risk every time I failed to meet their demands. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe slowly. This wasn't about one night. This was about breaking a cycle. And cycles don't break gently. They shatter. I walked back to the bed, picked up my phone, and replayed the message, this time not as a daughter reacting emotionally, but as someone listening for the truth hidden inside the words. She said he had a fever. She said they needed the power back. She admitted he wasn't being properly cared for. Each sentence wasn't just a plea, it was evidence. My fingers steadied as I saved the recording, then opened my contacts and dialed a number I had never imagined calling before. Emergency services. The line connected quickly. I swallowed once before speaking. "My name is Reagan," I said, my voice firm despite the storm inside me. "I'm calling to report a welfare concern. There's a disabled man at this address. My father and I have reason to believe he's being neglected." There was a pause on the other end, then a calm, professional voice responded, "Can you provide more details?" I did. Everything. The accident, his condition, the dependency, the voicemail. By the time I finished, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. "We've received the information," the dispatcher said. "A unit is being sent for a welfare check immediately." Immediately. The word echoed in my mind as I lowered the phone slowly. It was done. There was no turning back now. I sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing, the weight of what I had just done settling over me. This wasn't revenge. Not really. This was exposure. This was forcing the truth into the open where it couldn't be ignored, where it couldn't be covered up with excuses or manipulation. And if I was right, if what I feared was actually happening inside that house, then tonight wouldn't just change my life. It would change everything. Hours passed. Each one felt longer than the last. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat by the window, watching as the sky slowly began to lighten, the storm easing just enough for the world to come back into view. And then I heard it, distant at first, faint, but unmistakable. Sirens. They grew louder, cutting through the morning silence, echoing across the frozen landscape. I closed my eyes for a brief second, my heart tightening. They were there. By the time I arrived at the house, following behind Mr. Henderson's car, the driveway was already filled with flashing lights, police vehicles, an ambulance. The scene felt surreal, like something out of a story I wasn't supposed to be part of. But I was. This was my reality now. I stepped out of the car, the cold hitting me again, though this time I barely felt it. Everything inside me was focused on one thing: my father. We moved quickly toward the front door, paramedics already preparing their equipment, officers standing by with serious expressions. The door swung open before we even reached it. Pamela stood there, her face pale, her composure gone. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Why are they here?" An officer stepped forward calmly, holding up a document. "We're here to conduct a welfare check," he said. "Please step aside." She tried to argue, to deflect, to regain control. But this time, no one listened. They moved past her, and I followed. The moment I stepped into that house again, the cold hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Not just physically, but emotionally. The warmth was gone. The illusion was gone. And down the hallway, the truth was waiting. I ran to his room. The door was partially open, and what I saw inside broke me. My father lay motionless on the bed, tangled in sheets that hadn't been changed, his skin pale, his body fragile in a way that made him look smaller than I remembered. The air was cold, too cold. The equipment that should have been running wasn't. "Dad," my voice cracked as I rushed to his side, dropping to my knees beside the bed. His hand was cold when I took it in mine, too cold. But when I spoke again, his eyes fluttered open. Just slightly, just enough. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't abandoned him. I had saved him. Behind me, the paramedics moved quickly, their voices sharp and urgent as they assessed his condition. High fever, severe dehydration, get him on the stretcher now. Everything moved fast after that. But I didn't let go of his hand. Not this time, not ever again. 1 week after that morning, the morning that shattered everything and rebuilt it in a way I never thought possible, I found myself standing in front of the house again. But this time, I wasn't the one being pushed out. I was the one walking in with authority. The driveway looked the same as it always had, covered in a thin layer of melting snow, the tall windows reflecting a sky that felt calmer than anything I had known in years. But the feeling in my chest was completely different. No fear. No hesitation, only clarity. Beside me, Mr. Henderson stepped out of the car with his usual composed expression, a leather briefcase in hand. Behind us, 4 security guards moved into position without a word. Their presence wasn't for intimidation, it was for certainty, because we both knew Pamela and Alicia wouldn't leave quietly. I took a slow breath before walking toward the front door. It wasn't locked. That alone told me everything I needed to know. The moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere hit me chaotic, tense, desperate. The house that had once been maintained to perfection now looked like it had been turned upside down. Drawers were open, boxes scattered across the floor. Paintings leaned carelessly against the walls, and in the middle of it all, they were packing. Pamela stood near the dining table, hurriedly wrapping a crystal vase in newspaper, while Elysia moved back and forth between rooms, stuffing items into a suitcase without any sense of order. A man I didn't recognize, likely some kind of dealer, was inspecting furniture with a calculating look, a phone in his hand as if ready to negotiate prices. They weren't leaving. They were looting. The sound of the door closing behind us made all three of them freeze. Pamela turned first. The moment her eyes landed on me, the color drained from her face. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Though the strength in her voice was gone, I didn't answer. I simply stepped further into the room, my gaze sweeping over everything they had touched, everything they thought they could take. The dealer was the first to react. He glanced between us, quickly reading the tension, then straightened and cleared his throat. "I think I'll come back another time," he muttered, before slipping past the guards and disappearing out the door. Smart man. Elysia, on the other hand, wasn't as quick to understand. She dropped the handbag she was holding onto the table and stormed toward me, her face twisted with anger. "You've got some nerve showing up here after what you did," she snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've caused?" I met her gaze calmly. "Yes," I said, "I do." That seemed to unsettle her more than any argument would have. Before she could continue, Mr. Henderson stepped forward, placing his briefcase on the table with a deliberate motion. The sound alone was enough to cut through the tension. "I believe it's time we clarified a few things," he said evenly. Pamela tried to interrupt. "We don't need—" "Yes," he said, his tone firm but controlled. "You do." He opened the briefcase and removed a set of documents, placing them neatly on the table between us. "According to the official land registry and the terms of the inheritance," he continued, "this property belongs solely to Miss Reagan." Silence. Heavy, unavoidable. Pamela blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "That's not possible," she said quickly. "This house belongs to my husband. It's marital property." Mr. Henderson didn't react. Instead, he slid another document forward. 10 years ago," he said, "your husband transferred ownership of this property to his mother as part of a legal financial settlement. Upon her passing, the property was transferred to Miss Reagan. You were allowed to reside here, but you have no legal claim to ownership." Each word landed like a hammer. I watched Pamela's face as the reality settled in. The certainty she had lived with for years collapsed in seconds. "You're lying," Elysia snapped, stepping forward again. "This is a trick. Dad told me this house would be mine." I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "Dad also trusted you to take care of him," I said quietly, "and we all know how that turned out." Her expression snapped from anger to something sharper. Desperation. "You're a thief," she spat. "You manipulated everything. You—" She lunged forward before she could finish. It happened fast. One of the guards stepped in immediately, intercepting her mid-step, his grip firm but controlled as he held her back. She struggled for a moment, her anger flaring into something almost feral, but she couldn't break free. "Careful," Mr. Henderson said calmly. "Any further aggression will result in legal consequences." That stopped her. Not completely, but enough. I checked my watch, then looked back at both of them. "You have 30 minutes, I said, my voice steady. "You can take your personal clothes. Nothing else." Pamela stared at me, her eyes wide. "You can't be serious." "I am." Elysia let out a bitter laugh. "Everything in this house is ours. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. "Because I paid for it." The words hung in the air. Simple. Undeniable. "For the past 2 years," I continued, "every bill, every purchase, every item in this house came from my account. If you'd like to dispute that, we can go through the receipts one by one." Neither of them spoke, because they knew. The next 30 minutes passed in a tense silence that felt almost surreal. I stood there with the security team, watching as they packed this time under supervision. Every item they tried to take beyond basic clothing was removed. Designer handbags, jewelry, electronics. Even the coats they had wrapped themselves in days earlier, all of it stayed. At one point, Alicia tried to slip a necklace into her bag. Her movements quick and subtle. I saw it immediately. "Take it out," I said. She froze. Then, slowly, reluctantly, she reached into the bag and pulled it back out, placing it on the table without meeting my eyes. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small. When the 30 minutes were up, I didn't need to say anything. The guards moved into position. Pamela picked up her suitcase, her movements stiff, her face pale. Alicia followed, her expression hollow. Her anger burned down into something quieter and far more fragile. They walked toward the door. No more shouting, no more threats, just silence. I followed them to the entrance, watching as they stepped out into the cold, the same cold they had thrown me into not long ago. For a brief second, Pamela turned back, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something. But nothing came out. Because there was nothing left to say, I closed the door. Firmly, the sound echoed through the house, final and absolute. And just like that, it was over. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. 3 months later, my life looked nothing like it had before. The house was sold. I didn't want to keep something that held so many painful memories. The process was quick, almost effortless, as if even the universe wanted me to move on. With the money, I bought a smaller place near the coast, a quiet apartment filled with sunlight and the constant sound of waves. And my father, he got better. Not overnight, not easily, but steadily. Away from the stress, the neglect, the tension, his body began to recover. He regained strength, little by little, until one evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, he turned to me. His voice was weak, unsteady, but clear. "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they meant everything. I smiled through tears, squeezing his hand gently, because in that moment, I knew every choice I had made, every risk, every painful step had been worth it. As for Pamela and Alicia, they didn't disappear. Life didn't give them some dramatic ending. It gave them something far more real. Consequences. Alicia was facing charges for unauthorized use of my accounts, forced to work a job she never would have considered before, just to survive. Pamela, stripped of everything she had built her identity on, was left with nothing but the reality she had spent years avoiding. And me? I didn't look back, because the greatest revenge I could ever have was no longer needing them at all. Sometimes, the hardest truth to accept is that not everyone who shares your blood shares your heart. This story wasn't just about betrayal or revenge, it was about waking up, about realizing that love should never feel like a burden you carry alone, and that sacrifice without respect will only break you, not save anyone else. What Reagan went through is something many people silently endure, the guilt, the pressure, the fear of walking away. But her journey shows us something powerful. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. Choosing yourself is not selfish. And sometimes, the only way to truly protect the people you love is to stop protecting the ones who are hurting you. In the end, this wasn't a story about destroying others. It was about rebuilding yourself. If this story made you feel something anger, sadness, or even strength, then you're not alone. There are many stories like this. Stories that remind us who we are and what we deserve. So if you want to hear more real, emotional, and thought-provoking stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Tale Society. Your support means more than you know, and your story might be the next one that inspires someone else to find their strength.